Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes of veteran mental health. I'm your host, Dwayne France. Let's get ready to make sure that your headspace and timing set correctly. Hey everybody, welcome to Headspace and Timing. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for checking us out. As many of you who serve know, the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal, is one of the greatest weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing isn't set right, however, it's just a huge chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my mission here, to raise awareness about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week we'll talk about different aspects of veteran mental health and interview mental health professionals that are working with veterans, service members, and their families around the country. All right, folks. Hey, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing podcast. I got a great episode for you today. I'd like to introduce Mr. James Pond. James, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to hear a little bit about you, sort of what you're doing, and just give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, so I come from a long line of military service. My dad was in Vietnam. And right out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps, went into intelligence and special operations. After 8 years, got out of the military, really struggled to figure out who I was outside of being a Marine. And I wandered around, did investigations. I did some consulting work, wandered around, finally ended up doing corporate sales. And in my early 30s, my wife and I were sitting down with really young kids, watched a television special about young girls being trafficked in Southeast Asia. And 9 months later, we sold everything we owned, moved our family to Cambodia, and started working with sexually trafficked girls. After about 12 years of doing that, I remember just prior to going to Cambodia, Marines started hitting the ground. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be an era and a generation of military men and women that are going to suffer with significant physical wounds, but also psychological and emotional. And after about 12 years and working in the anti-human trafficking space, really felt like it was time to make a job transition. And I had had a lot of exposure to issues around trauma, things around mindfulness. And so in 2015, I started having conversations with an organization called Veterans Path. They were looking for an executive director. And in 2016, I was hired to take over leadership and help the organization grow. And so we are an organization that is focused on working with vets from 1990 on, with a focus on IOF, OEF, New Dawn vets that are really struggling with issues around, suicidality, post-traumatic stress, military sexual trauma, moral injury, traumatic brain injury. And it's been a really phenomenal journey, being able to work with this cohort of veterans, but also seeing how mindfulness and meditation are actually impacting their lives and making a difference.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. You were one of the Marines. You joined the Marines and peace broke out, kind of thing?
Yeah, there was something like that.
Yeah.
I was in during the Desert Storm era, and the military was really fixated at that time. The direction was counterterrorism was just ramping up. The military thought we were going in the direction of low-intensity conflict, so we had things like Panama, Somalia,
right.
This little thing called Desert Storm whooped up, and that didn't take very long. We were fighting the drug war in South America as well as here in the U.S. I don't think anyone anticipated that we would be facing, just within a short period of time, going into what is now a 15-year war.
Right. And so it's the other interesting thing is you went sort of overseas, and how did your military service in your military background really help you to prepare for what I imagine were just maybe some different austere conditions in Cambodia?
The military does a lot to embed in you discipline and a determination to get things done. Regardless of what our experience has been in the military, with hurry up and wait, as service members, our desire is to get things done, to get work finished. And so I think when I was over there, regardless of the conditions and the obstacles that we faced, there was this really strong, hard-headed determination that we were going to make a difference, we were going to help people. So I think that discipline, I think that sense of obligation and service, and just the ability to endure a lot of hardship really made a difference. It helped me to be able to lead our staff. It helped me to be able to lead my family, and it helped me to, structure my own life so that, I knew how to take care of myself under those conditions.
Yeah, that puts me in mind of like Team Rubicon. It's in taking the skills that we had in the military and applying it to New World or a different mission, essentially.
I love what Team Rubicon is doing, because they're taking the things that are already embedded in veterans and just helping bring that alive. Often when we leave the military, and this is what I struggled with, you have this sense of purpose.
Right.
You are whatever you are. You're a soldier, you're a sailor, you're an airman, you're a Marine, and you've got this sense of like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is my function in the world. Mm-hmm. And then you get out and you don't have those connections anymore. You don't necessarily have that identity any longer. And you got to figure out, well, what am I doing? What is my purpose in the world now? And you go to your workaday job, and I think a lot of veterans are really struggling with their identity sitting in a cubicle or going to an office 9 to 5 or showing up to a work site and wondering, how does this play into this desire to really want to serve and do something? Team Rubicon Mission Continues, I think, are really great organizations because they're simply tapping into the natural strengths that veterans have and giving them an outlet to serve.
Yeah, this is actually something that I see a lot with the veterans I work with. It is existential. We talk about existentialism in the mental health sense, but it is a lack of meaning and purpose. One of the guys that I had deployed with in Afghanistan got out, went to work for USAA. Great job, right? Thai, doing everything, but he hated it. He was like, but this is, and he was like, yeah, I got the job. I sort of landed on my feet, but it's not fulfilling to me. And it's interesting to hear that you went out and pretty drastically, I think, or you went out and made purpose in the world. So,
yeah. Well, and I think that's the other thing that veterans do, is that if there's not a door, blow a hole in the wall. Right. And we were really looking. I think as a family. My wife spent 6 years as a Marine Corps wife. My kids grew up around military culture, and all of a sudden, there was the sense of, let's figure out some way to be able to give back in the world. I think what was ingrained was, we helped our kids to grow up with this understanding of, serve others, live a self-sacrificial life, look for the opportunity to make a difference in the world. And, yet, most people are wondering, how do I, take Thanksgiving and go to a homeless shelter? They're not really looking at, how do I create an envelope for my life to actually be of service. And it doesn't have to be, moving to a third world country. It can be, serving in your own community or serving in your own family. It's where, you place those priorities. And I think veterans just often get lost because they're not sure what that looks like in their life. And that's part of what we do as an organization, is really creating new pathways of service for vets to be able to find that in their lives.
Yeah, so and that does sort of take me to what Veterans Path is doing. So can you tell us a little bit more about Veterans Path, maybe a little bit of the history and kind of how things started?
Yeah, absolutely. Veterans Path by mission, we enable veterans to, rediscover, purpose, meaning, and joy in their lives through mindfulness, meditation, and a safe community. That's our mission statement. And I'll break that down in a second. But the organization started in 2008, and it was started by two women, Lee Lesser and Chris Fortin, who they were around during the Vietnam War, and they watched what happened to veterans as they came back and the struggles that they went through, whether that was, dealing with post-traumatic stress or homelessness or drug and alcohol addiction, and really watching how society responded to them. And they wanted to create a world that was different for veterans. And so they had both come from the sensory awareness and meditation world and started meeting with vets and asking, what can we do? What can we offer that would make a difference? And they realized that, there was a real strength in offering these mindfulness tools that would help veterans to be able to find their ground and maybe find their way towards hope and healing in their lives. So originally they thought, we'll do these courses, we'll bring vets in and they'll sit and we'll meditate and have their first event, and learn very quickly that they needed to integrate some other things to make it interesting to vets. Vets need to get out and move, do something physical. And so they started creating what have become the 4 pillars of the organization. So we use physical activity, outdoors in nature, as one pillar. Get vets out and activating themselves physically. Physical fitness is a part of overall wellness, but it also helps to kind of bring to the surface a lot of the emotions and things that are triggering for vets. The second pillar is using mindfulness and meditation skills and tools and integrating those into a veteran's life. The third pillar is really creating veteran community. A lot of us get out of the military and we go back home, and we don't realize that we've had these really deep friendships and connections with other vets, regardless of how much we loved or didn't love them during our time in the service. We're still connected to them. There are brothers and sisters. We would have taken a bullet for them, and yet they can be in Florida or Vermont or North Carolina, and you're out in California, Oregon, Washington. You're physically dislocated. Right. So creating community is a really important part of Veterans Path of bringing veterans from all 5 services back into a community where they can support each other in a healthy way. And then the last one is really creating new pathways of service. And so all that to say, what we do is we provide a number of programs that vets can either dabble in or deep dive into. So we do one-day events, which typically are rock climbing. We just did a canoeing event, hiking. We've done qigong, yoga. But it's a one-day event. You come out from 9 to 5, and it's kind of a sampling of what Veterans Path is offering. Learn some mindfulness skills, kind of experience what that might be like, connect to some other vets, but you go home. We're doing 3-day retreats, which are a slightly deeper dive for vets that are really looking for, how would I begin to integrate these things and work through some of the issues in my life. And then we offer 2 other programs. So one of them is what we're calling a 4-month anchor program. And it's a really serious commitment for vets. And it consists of a 5-day retreat and a 15-week support program. So, most of the retreats that we've seen happen kind of in a vacuum. You go to a retreat, you have a mountaintop experience, you're out there with vets, you're facing some of the things in your life, you're on an emotional high, and then you've got to go home to the same things that you were just coming from. So, it's family, it's work, it's life, and now you're kind of back at the grind, and it just begins to kind of unravel all that. And so you come off of what we call an emotional hangover. Right. And so we wanted to really create something that was in depth that could really support veterans in integrating those things into their lives. So we offer this 5-day retreat, and then a 15-week support program that has some weekend retreats worked into it. They're getting a lot of support from facilitators. There's peer group check-ins, assignments, homework. There's an actual curriculum to it. And what we found is that 15-week program really helps veterans to integrate these mindfulness practices into their lives, develop a much stronger sense of community and bonding with other veterans, and really working through some personal growth things that I think often get overlooked during our military service, and even more overlooked, when we enter the veteran community.
Yeah, so that's really great. Now, you're not a clinical mental health professional yourself.
Oh, dear God, I'm not. No, I am an armchair psychiatrist. I have been exposed to some of the world's best trauma specialists. I've spent a lot of time learning, but my learning has all been experiential. I am not a mental health care professional.
But when we talked last time, and this is obviously one of my concerns, and I agree that a lot of time you come down from the mountain and then you have to go back to the living room, the same place you came from. What is your opinion on clinical mental health counseling, formal therapy, so to speak, integrated into what you're doing?
I think it's absolutely critical. I don't come from the world of either or. I think alternative therapies are extremely important, but I also believe that mental health needs a holistic approach. So our approach has always been, we are not the answer. We are a part of an answer. And we really want vets to find what works for them. And so we encourage conversations between our team and veterans therapists, if that's of use to their treatment and care. We look for mental health services that are local to our program so that we can refer vets back to mental health care professionals. So here in the state of Tennessee, we work with Centerstone Military Services, great group of folks. They've offered support to any veteran that wants it. We work very closely with our VA partners and looking at the services that they're receiving there, whether that's voc rehab therapists or trauma programs at the VA. I really think it's important that there be lots of different venues and avenues for veterans to pursue wholeness and healing in their lives.
No, I absolutely agree. And it's, again, the adjunctive therapies and traditional therapy combined can be very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Now, you've talked a little bit about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. I know when I first started talking to veterans about meditation, they had this image of, sitting cross-legged on the floor going, it's just clearing their mind. Can you talk to us a little bit about what mindfulness meditation is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was in the same place. When I thought about meditation, I was thinking of, some Indian guru in a cave with a loincloth on.
Right.
And I think much of what has happened in the meditation space is that, it used to kind of belong to sort of the 60s hippies. And I think what we're seeing now is it's coming into mainstream society. I've been reading articles about the 15 top CEOs in the country are actual avid meditators. And meditation is really learning to focus your mind. I think the misconception is that meditation is about learning to think of nothing or to empty your mind and have sort of this none thought going on. And in reality, it's really learning to focus your mind and pay attention to what's going on. It's allowing emotions to come and then letting them pass, because often what happens is we live in this miasma of an inner voice that's constantly talking to us. And if you're a veteran out there and you're listening to this and you're dealing with, intrusive memories, you're having problems with your emotional and physicality being connected together, meditation is something that can really help teach you how to focus. And so what it is learning how to be present. And we say that a lot, we want to be present in our lives, but meditation is a means of learning to focus on a particular object, a phrase, the breath. There's a lot of different types of meditation that you can engage in, but it's really learning to focus your mind, pay attention to what's going on, be aware of what's happening both physically and emotionally. And I always say that it's helping veterans to see what is present and real in this moment and learning to separate what they're experiencing from what they need to focus on. And what I've seen happen is that it really helps in vets in particular with learning how to respond to something rather than react to something. So mindfulness practice can look like everything from taking 3 deep breaths to taking 30 minutes out to do focused breathing meditation. And there's a wide variety of, eating meditation, walking meditation, sitting meditation that is beneficial to any and all of us. But in particular, veterans are finding that this is extremely helpful in addressing issues around trauma, learning how to figure out what's happening physically and emotionally in their own bodies, learning to be comfortable with that, and then sense what's happening in this very moment and what's real and what's present and right in front of me right now.
Yeah, I think, and especially in my clinical practice, I can tell that that it really does help. I first started hearing about mindfulness not in a meditation sense, but I listened to a podcast called the Brain Science Podcast, and a lot when I was traveling back and forth and all those cross country trips. But the neurologists were seeing a lot of change building in the prefrontal lobe and neuroplasticity coming from as you said, master meditators or individuals that had really kind of brought it in. I think John Kabat-Zinn bringing it to the West was a big thing, but also I recall some like the Dalai Lama and the Buddhist monks really bought into showing how meditation can change the physical brain and increase prefrontal lobe and all these things that we need, like you said, to kind of respond rather than react.
Yeah, meditation, just for the layperson, not even for a monk, over time, they say that in small doses. So, anyone who's considering this, it's not, meditating 3 hours a day. Just taking 10 minutes a day will actually help the brain to create new neural pathways. So where a lot of our thinking has gotten stuck or trapped behind emotional blockages, or just old patterns of thinking, meditation is a way to actually, reprogram your brain to think and process information in a different way. It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, and it's powerful in its simplicity, I think, as well as powerful in its impact. No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, one of the things that when you said simplicity, I think that we often forget is that, every day we breathe in and out.
Right.
Completely unconscious of it, and yet those two actions hold our life in the balance. If any one of those stops, we're dead. And so how often do we check in with our breath and go, am I breathing? I think a lot of vets that are undergoing trauma or experiencing emotional pain oftentimes will stop breathing in that process, not consider that it's something so simplistic and not taking advantage of it.
One of the easiest things that I found to be able to explain, especially to all of the veterans that I work with when I talk about this, is what do you do at the rifle range, right? You're not worrying about what you had for breakfast or what you're going to have for dinner. When you're actually in there in that qualification moment, right, you're focusing on your breathing. You're literally concentrating on your trigger squeeze, where my cheek is, all of these, and that's like at a point of total focus in the moment. And once I start to explain it to veterans, they were like, well, yeah, I never considered it that way, but yeah, that is kind of accurate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a whole thing of the more conscious you are of your breathing, that on each exhale, your body is actually going through a relaxation state. When we're unconscious of it, our bodies often don't respond to that same kind of stimuli. But that breathing and that on the exhale, if people will pay attention to their breath, they'll find their body relaxing at each exhalation and being able to really reconnect to like, oh, what's going on in my body right now? Oh, my shoulders are tense, my neck's tight, my back is, withdrawn, and really being able to kind of relax into that breath. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a totally different state of mind.
So how do you help veterans or when they're talking about, well, I just can't, my mind's racing so much, I can't stop thinking. I wake up at 2 a.m. and lightning's flashing in my head and all this other stuff. How do you, what's a way that you usually explain to veterans how to really not hold on to those thoughts?
Well, I think it's learning to distinguish what is actually going on, and you're the mental health professional, but in lay terms, trauma is really a disconnection between our physical selves and our emotional selves. And so we find things going on with our bodies, right? We're having, flashes behind our eyes, or we're feeling our heart rate go up, or we're feeling our breath get short, or our shoulders get tight. And yet we don't have a connection to what's going on emotionally that's making our body respond this way. Or in the other direction, we got stuff circulating in our heads, but we have no connection in our body to why we're experiencing those things. And so, what I tell vets is that meditation is a way of helping to, integrate what's going on physically and emotionally, because they're so tied together. So it's just taking that moment to just stop, put your hand over your chest, feel your heartbeat, close your eyes, and take 3 really deep breaths, and just feel where you are in that present moment, and then try to start thinking, like, what's going on? What's really happening? Is it dog barking outside? Is something happening in the house? Because I think what happens is either our bodies or our minds, separate from those things, are experiencing hypervigilance, some form of anxiety. Something is going on that we need to make that connection, figure out what's happening here. Do I need to be responding this way, or is my body just so accustomed to it that I'm having an autonomic response rather than being mindful? Taking that moment can make a difference.
As a lay person, you're extremely accurate. No, that is in a lot of the trauma, post-traumatic stress has been shown to change the amygdala, the hippocampus, and those lower portions of the brain, and those are all tied into the nervous system and things like that. And so when those are kicked on, I tell veterans that's like the gas pedal. So the gas pedal trumps on the gas pedal, but the prefrontal lobe, that front of your brain, that's the governor that keeps the gas pedal, the RPMs from going too high. Well, if the governor isn't functioning very well, if our prefrontal lobe doesn't have control over that, like you said, we don't have that conscious awareness, then it is going to redline, and until we bring that back. So, no, it was pretty accurate as a layperson. You were right on it.
Well, we always say it's human brain over lizard brain.
Exactly.
Humans have evolved for survival, not happiness. And so, when we go to our most base level, we're responding to, our primitive brain, which is telling us, fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And our prefrontal cortex is that ability to process, like you said, the governor. It's really learning to build that up and be able to rationally tell the primitive brain it's got it all wrong, that there's no reason to live in that hypervigilant state.
And this is what we've seen with trauma over and over again, and we call it the battle-scarred amygdala and the hippocampus and all like this, is that becomes so activated, and then that front part that really helps control that is just totally taken offline. Really, if you're in a really highly traumatic state, those things like alcohol that take the prefrontal lobe offline can really exacerbate the situation instead of calm it down. So, and I like how mindfulness meditation really helps, as you said before, establish those neural pathways really from the front to the back, and helps the veteran get more control over their autonomic responses.
Absolutely. And the other thing too, you kind of touched on it just a moment ago, is that there's an overall wellness component that I think vets need to consider, because it's I think mindfulness is definitely a component. I think it's extremely helpful. I think that seeing a mental health professional and doing cognitive therapy can be extremely beneficial. But it's also the how you're eating, the kind of exercise that you're getting, because you really need a holistic approach to getting yourself well. And I think using alcohol, drugs, or even lousy eating as a form of coping ultimately leads to dishealth. And so I really encourage veterans to take a look at what's happening with your lifestyle, your diet, your fitness, along with all of those other things, because those will help you round out a lot of the issues that I think folks are facing.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of that is a little bit different than what we experienced in the military. In dialectical behavior therapy, I have a group that I do, and one of the veterans recently had said, you know what, you're telling me to do all this, and these are things that I did not do whenever I was in the military. So things like making yourself, taking care of physical wellness, like, going to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor. We didn't do that, because who wanted to be the sick call ranger, right? Sleep, proper sleep habits. I know how many times did you pull a 24-hour shift or a 48-hour shift, or things like that. And so there's these things that we know that are wellness, and maybe we might even tell people, take care of yourself when you're in the military. But when we were in, young, dumb, going, 25 miles an hour, we really didn't do those things. So it takes a shift in a veteran's mindset.
It does, and I think that's one of the things at Veterans Path that we're fixated on is really helping vets to connect to the positive things in their service, but also to be able to make that transition into their civilian life. And I've said a number of times, that when you're in the military, you belong to the government. You're government property. But when you get out of the military, you really belong to your community and your family and yourself. And I think it's a whole different approach, even in fitness. I've done, CrossFit, I've done the kettlebells, I've done the whole thing. And a lot of what we're doing in the fitness world is trying to mimic what the military does. Put on a ruck and go pound yourself to death for, 3 days to get a patch to stick on your backpack. And we're not really thinking about what's going to be restorative and nourishing to my body and actually help me in the process of being able to live into my 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even your 90s, and be able to move well and be able to function well. And so, same thing with diet. God, I spent a lot of days, going through fast food drive-thrus because I just didn't have time to go eat, right, let alone think about my own nutrition and what's gonna make my body function at a high level. So, I think mindfulness takes us beyond just kind of the mental focus of learning to sit and deal with things emotionally. It's really being mindful of what am I doing with my entire life? How am I being in the world? How do I treat myself when I'm exercising, when I'm eating, when I'm sleeping, when I'm, working or engaging in my family? It's a more holistic approach, and it is very different than military service. And I think it's reconditioning vets to connect to, the positive things, but some of those negative things we've got to leave behind and reconstruct something that's more valuable for our longevity and health.
And I definitely like that idea of mindfulness being nested. You can have immediate mindfulness of where I'm at in my space, in this room, in this chair. What do my toes feel like in my shoes, kind of thing. We can have that immediate mindfulness, but then that nests just like a smaller unit in a larger unit, or a smaller task building for larger tasks. Once you can master those smaller tasks and then have the ability to apply this in other areas of our lives, in our relationships, in our employment, but even, as you said, in our purpose, in our overall, where we're at in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think, and it really doesn't matter. I guess I've seen vets that have done 2 years in the military and 26 years in the military, and we all come out with these same kinds of sort of mental views of how things are supposed to be, as opposed to what might be best for us or how we might be different, what adjustments we might need to make. And one of the things that I would say is there's so much ritual around going into the military, from the moment you raise your hand at MEPS to boot camp to promotions and all of receiving awards and medals and commendations. And then when we get out of the military, we get handed a piece of paper. There is no ritual for becoming a civilian. And so, we think of them as, dirty scrubs, yet we forget we're one of them. We are now, we live among them, and we are one ourselves. And so, one of the things that we strive for as an organization is really helping veterans to have some ritual around becoming a civilian and entering into a whole new era in their lives, and receiving that with the same kind of, power and transition as they did anything else in the military.
No, and that is very accurate. If I spent 22 years in, so I had the closure. I had a retirement ceremony, right? I had a long lead time that I leaned really far forward in the foxhole to make sure that I landed on my feet when I came out. But somebody who's medically retired, for example, may not get that or won't get that. Definitely an ETS, somebody who just leaves the service, that they're not going to get that. There is no kind of closure. And there's a lot of talk now about just in the veteran community about providing some of that. I was actually in probably now, but when this will air in a month or so, but there was just an honor flight out of I think it was Minnesota that took Vietnam veterans for the first time. Yeah, and so typically it was Korean War and World War II, but now the Vietnam veterans getting their honor flight. I had the opportunity to do that in the mid '80s with my dad and my uncle, and it was amazing. It was formative for me to see that kind of ritual on the other end. But something else you just brought up is we put so much effort into making someone a soldier, a Marine, so there's so much effort that I think there's a part of us that thinks anything worth doing, we must exert a lot of effort to do, right? And so mindfulness is so simple. It can't be this simple because it's not hard, right?
Right. And so we look at these complications as something that is just a part of the experience, and not understanding that we may be able to integrate more ease into our lives and begin to enjoy that process rather than feeling like it's a constant, sort of boot camp struggle to get through things.
Right. I think I told you when we talked last time, I had an experience where I had I think she's an excellent mentor, but my instructor in my clinical program, we were going through as a substance abuse class, but we had to do some mindfulness practice, and I was struggling with it because it was so easy, and it can't be this easy. And then one day I threw a ruck on my back and I walked up to the top of Mount Rosa here in Colorado Springs. It's about right at about 1,100 feet or 11,000 feet. And I sat down and it crossed my legs, and I had a great meditation experience. And then I went back to her and I said, Dr. Varheely, it was so great. I went to the top of a mountain. I had this great meditation experience. And she looked at me. She said, you're a moron. You could have done the same thing on your front porch. And that's really and now I actually do. I go on my front porch, and that's one of the places where I have to meditate. But it's this idea that we have to have this epic quest to go do. But that's something that a veteran at the end of this, listening to this, they can find some place to go meditate, and it's not that hard.
No, it's one of the best pieces of advice I got was early on in my own meditation journey was having folks tell me, don't find a quiet spot to meditate. So I used to do it out in the garage where I could hear all the noise and the cars going by and the outside distractions, because if you can learn to find your ground when there's distraction, that's when it becomes really useful. If you've got to isolate yourself, again, you're putting this odd pressure on yourself to have to create conditions to be able to find peace in your own life. And that's really not what it's about. It's about really being able to ground yourself and find peace in any circumstance. So that's a lot of great information, and I really appreciate the clarification about mindfulness. And so now, say a veteran's listening to this, what's the next step? What do you recommend maybe or some of the best ways? Like I use Insight Timer, as an app for meditation, and I'll include that in the show notes. But what sort of apps or programs do you recommend that veterans, if they want to try this? Yeah. So if you're a book person, the top books I would recommend to folks would be John Cabot's Zen Mindfulness for Beginners. That's a great primer if you just want to know, the bare basics. Pema Chandran has a great book called How to Meditate. Real basic, super easy and accessible. The apps that we love at Veterans Path is we use Headspace. And if there are any veterans listening to this podcast, if they will connect with us, I will give them a code. They'll have a free year subscription to Headspace. So that's a great offering for vets to be able to access meditation tools. We love Insight Timer. I think that's a great tool that's super accessible with a lot of variety to it. And then there's resources on our website. If they want to hear veterans actually leading meditation practices, if you go to veteranspath.org, look under our resources page, there's guided meditations that they can actually start to engage and do some practice right there. Those would be probably my top bets. I'm trying to think if there's any other books that have been very instructive or helpful. Let me think about that, and I'll actually send some. Maybe we can post it with this podcast.
Yeah, so and I'll definitely add both of those books to the show notes, and then a link to Headspace. I know that organization that I'm working with, Objective Zero, that they've connected with Headspace and that year subscription for veterans is something
Yeah.
that Headspace is doing. It's something like what, a $300, or it's
like I think it's like $100 and something a subscription.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we've got our San Francisco folks have connected with them, and so we've got a great relationship, and they've given us a bunch of subscriptions. So if it's something you want to refer folks, we'd love to connect. We'll get them a code, and they'll get a free membership.
So how would a veteran connect with you even for that? Just through the Veterans Path website, or do they have a different?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways there's actually several ways they can get a hold of us. They can go to veteranspath.org, just go to our contact page, connect with us, and we'll get back to you. You can find us on Facebook under Veterans Path and just leave us a direct message. We'll connect with you. You can find us on Instagram. We'd love you there. So just reach out to us, or they can just write us at info@veteranspath.org, and we'll make sure that we hook them up.
And so is that also a way if there is a veteran, right? And I think when we talked last, you have some events coming up this fall. I think this episode will air probably in September sometime. But I think you have a retreat in October, I think, in Tennessee. But also, so how can a veteran, if they want to get involved in some of the actual events that Veterans Path is doing?
Yeah, so if they go to the website, they'll find information under our programs page. But we are having two really in-depth men's programs, one in September in California, one in October in Tennessee. And we are looking for veterans that have served since 1990 that are interested in being a part of these programs. If they go on there, there's an actual application page. They can just put their information in, and we'll circle back around with them and get them more information about those events. We're also offering a number of different scheduled events throughout the year. So if they just go to our events page, they'll find more information about what's being offered. And I think this next week, we're actually planning our 2018 calendar. So even next year's events will start to get posted on the website. Any veteran that is in need and interested in programs like this, if they'll get in touch with us, we may be able to find them something that's in their own state or in their own area that they don't already know about. So, we'd love to help them access, some alternative programs around mindfulness if we can, so they can reach us through the website or through our social media.
That's great. So, really, as we come to the end here, is there any last words that you'd like to give to the audience? Any final thoughts?
I think probably one of the most prominent things I would leave is that, for as many services are out there for veterans, the number of meaningful services that veterans actually need are not that rich. And so I really recommend that if you've got veterans in your life, or you're a veteran yourself and you're looking for help, that you start to look at some of these alternative opportunities that are out there, because they're really rich opportunities to find some new ways of facing and coming about issues in their lives. And so I'd encourage them to reach out to us or someone else and find out what might be available or accessible in their area.
Well, that's great. And I think that's definitely some good advice. Well, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and best of luck to you.
Absolutely. So that's it for today's Headspace and Timing show, folks. If you are finding yourself in a place where your headspace and timing isn't set correctly, make sure that you take the time to get yourself right, because that's the only way that you're going to find peace and wellness in your post-military life. We'll look forward to joining you next week. Thanks.